Hello, and welcome to Wrestling with Poetry, Kalamazoo, Michigan's premier wrestling and poetry podcast. Today, we'll hear from poet Greg Purcell, and I'll talk a little bit about monsters of wrestling. Greg Purcell's first collection of poetry, The Fundaments, was published by Poor Claudia in 2016. Most recently, his poetry has appeared in Canarium, Can We Have Our Ball Back, and Juniper.
Hello, Ish. Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to read my poetry on Wrestling with Poetry. It's a great honor. This is part of a diaristic piece, a very long piece that's been ongoing for 4 years. It's called Late Days, tentatively, and these poems date from when the pandemic was still raging. Some time passes. The thing goes immaterially wrong. Doctor, my thread is wound tight as dates within varied days. My cloth a ragged month. Years return in closet memory as rags. My doctor, a thought for the living in this long night, a memorial and dump heaps of rag for cities I have lived in, bedsheet cities piled in wet droves the size of warehouses. High in the tower nothing sits, unfunded, watching nothing. Sleet in heavy weather slicks the sickening walkways like realism. Black branches above Pearl Street, fat black birds at the hanging feeder, and a gray like human eyes behind the silhouettes. Presumptuous man, bagged in hanging meat, shadowed in the gray-blue workday. A poem to stave off death, and a poem to become weakened and to die. Hospital poems with limited beds, their editors return enriched with medicine to pull the tubes from puffing faces and watch them deflate. A poem syringed boiling red, the days of bubble traveling down the interstices towards a publisher's heart. A very light music, the date a day ding ding along January, deep within the century, return to actuary days. Accounts holding ding ding, a song as light as human lives, considered as bodies, and bodies ringing, ring-a-ling, dying, to greet the day. Like employees in sight of their employers, the dead leaves cover the ground beneath accumulated daylight hours of snow, crisp above the sediment ruin of autumn. Car tires wheezing on a patch of ice. Spring is a controversy. Staunching the bleeding from a minor cut, the Count says to the Countess, the day would be fine but for a little snag. Like Saturn, his ordinary car devours children the day drags from dutiful morning the light. All giving reason. The paper night a queering of typewritten stars. The death of people its. Gilded and strange, America laden slips over the bow and blips silently between the blue folds of her early embrace. The sky fuzzes orange fire. I can't breathe. The fusion of carbon to lung, the rumpling black organ canted over the cloud of living air, connecting each child I must have hated to the furnace I must have loved. Thank you very much. Also, Ish, I have a question for you. I think it's a pretty simple question. I wonder what's some of your favorite wrestling media? And I also wonder, what are some of your primary resources when you do research on wrestling? Okay, I take my question off the air. Godspeed and good luck.
Thank you, Greg. That was fantastic. Okay, to answer your question, favorite wrestling media? Well, there is a YouTube channel called Kingdom of Madness, which has wrestling promos. They are so beautiful. A lot of Macho Man Randy Savage is on it, and a lot of Mean Gene Okerlund. For older matches, I refer to CWA Memphis, which is also on YouTube. CWA stands for Continental Wrestling Association, but it would also be standing for Championship Wrestling Association. I know this is problematic, but I look for corroboration through Wikipedia and Reddit. I know that they're not perfect sources of facts, but they often have consensuses. Bleacher Report is also something that turns up a lot in searches, and I often see their ranked. It gives you a good idea of who are the ranked, top 10 ranked monsters, for instance. I check those out, and they often, the wrestlers that I find out about through Bleacher Report, I'll Google them and dig a little deeper, see how they are in interviews, because that kind of matters to me. What are my primary sources for wrestling facts? I find out about a character and then I Google them. What are my primary sources for wrestling facts? Well, facts and pro wrestling, it's more of wrestling lore than facts. But what I want to talk about this week are the great monsters of professional wrestling. According to Weasel365 on Reddit, the 4 categories of wrestlers are high flyer, technician, brawler, and a monster. High flyer, example, Leaping Lanny Poffo. Technician, Bret the Hitman Hart. Brawler, Cactus Jack. Weasel365 goes on to say, to be a monster, you must be in a class higher than a normal wrestler. Not necessarily a giant, but a kind of wrestler that literally inspires fear in both the fans and your opponents. It is a rare gift, says Weasel365. Here are some monsters you might want to know more about to fill out your ideas about pro wrestling. And this is my personal list of monsters who intrigue me. First on the list, Andre the Giant. He comes to mind because nobody's like him. He has a great voice, and in interviews he just seems like a magical figure. 2, the Mummified Yeti. Actually, it's just the Yeti, but this ridiculous figure looks like he is mummified. And I include him on this list because I really like the promo I saw of him, and I like the prop of his distant iceberg from whence I guess he emerged. 3, George the Animal Steel. He is on the list because I like him for being a high school teacher. I also like that he painted his tongue green. I also like that he had a little stuffed animal that he carried around with him. And even if nobody was gonna call him a monster, he would call himself a monster by calling himself, George the Animal Steel. Here was somebody I just found out about recently, and this is a figure called Lord Humongous. And this was played by many different people behind a mask. So the mask had, for instance, Sid Vicious, who began his wrestling life as a Lord Humongous. Many big guys would wrestle behind Humongous. Maybe this is how they decided if they wanted to stick with pro wrestling without losing face. Giant Baba, a Japanese wrestler. You can see footage of him on YouTube on Classic Puro 83. I saw him in a match with Dory Funk Jr., Andre the Giant, and him, of course, among other people. It was footage from 1992, so he's not a young man. Giant Baba was born in 1938, so you can do the math there. This is a slow-moving match. I put it on double speed and I still found it to be pretty slow, but they were wrestling anyway, and I take my hat off to that. He's interesting to watch. He's 6 foot 10 inches and is believed to have giantism. He is one of the most beloved wrestlers in Japan, even beyond his lifespan. And finally, number 7, though these are not ranked, Giant Gonzalez. Argentina's tallest man ever. He was also a pro wrestler and a world championship, and he wrestled in world championship wrestling. I think he also worked at WWE. He's billed as 8 feet, but in reality he was 7 foot 7 inches tall. He ended his days in Argentina. He also was a basketball player. He must have been very well liked. He didn't have money for his own health care at the end of his life, but people who loved him made sure he was taken care of. That sort of speaks to his character, I think, if people are going to care about you when you're in dire straits. Those are 7 monsters. Got any questions, comments, or wrestlers that you want mentioned on the podcast? Just email at wrestlingwithpoetry@gmail.com. That's wrestlingwithpoetry@gmail.com. Events this week in the Kalamazoo area. Independence Pro Wrestling returns to Kalamazoo at Ruggers Up and Under. The event is called Warfare. It hasn't happened yet. It's Saturday, November 18th. It's from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tickets are between $10 and $30. That's at Ruggers Up and Under, which is a sports bar. Louis Trophy House at 629 Walbridge Street has an open mic every Wednesday, apparently. You have to get there early or call in advance to sign up to perform. But this is something that happens every Wednesday at the time of 8 o'clock at the place of Louis Trophy House, located at 629 Walbridge Street. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Greg, for sharing your beautiful poems. I hope you all have a terrific week.